Right, so now we've fetched all of the data, let's just render it out onto the page. So on the final build, you can see here we have a filter section, but we'll leave that till later. Let's just get all of the Pokemon data. So at the minute, you can see we have a little hover effect, but each of these is a Pokemon card. So this can be a reusable component. So the way you would approach it is you have an image here. So you would pass an image down as a prop. You would also have the name, and then you also have the number of the Pokemon, but we're not fetching that. So what you can do instead is pass the index +1 because JavaScript starts with the number 0. So that will be the index, and then that way we have this UI rendering on the page. And then what we'll do is we'll tackle the color difference, and that is going to be based on the Pokemon type. So the type of Pokemon, for example, Pikachu is yellow because it is primarily an electric type Pokemon, whereas something like a Wartortle is blue because it's a water Pokemon. So we'll do that as well. So let's go ahead into our VS Code. So on the home page here, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I've got access to the data now, and that's working. So I'll just delete the console log, and then what we can do is render the p tag, which is the number of Pokemon, and we're getting access to that. So I want to get a few constants here, which is the number of Pokemon, and that is equal to data.allPokemon.total count. So you can see here, if we go into all Pokemon, we have the node and the total count. So essentially we have total count as a number. I'm just going to optional chain this. So if data is not there, then it will essentially handle it and not return undefined. So number of Pokemon here. And what you could also do is do a nullish coalescing operator. So if this doesn't handle anything as true, then what you can do is you can put your own string in here of whatever you want in here. So we can do NA like so. So that is that section there set. So what I'm going to do is change this to number of Pokemon here, just so we have it separated out, or you could do it in line as well. So now that is complete. What I also want to do is create a div now to render all of the Pokemon in. And the way you would get access to all of the Pokemon is if we go back into the browser. You can see here we are getting all the Pokemon, so we need to access data.allpokemon.nodes.map. So what I would do is destructure the Pokemon. So const all Pokemon is equal to data.allpokemon.nodes. So now we have access to that. And what I'm actually going to do is rename this to all Pokemon. So now what I can do is in the div, all Pokemon.map, for each Pokemon, I want to render a div. So let's render that div. And in this div, we're just going to render the Pokemon name, the Pokemon types, and also the Pokemon image. And then we also need to close this off now. And also we need a closing div as well, just to wrap the inner div. And now if I save and check the browser, you can now see we have the number of Pokemon, then it's got Bulbasaur, which is grass and poison. They're not separated, so we'll fix that. We have Ivysaur of grass and poison. The image hasn't loaded there, but you can see all of the images are being rendered and some aren't here. So what we need to do is go back into here, and let's render the image first at the top, like we have in the final build. And then we have the name. And then what we also want to do is render the number. So this will be the index +1. So this is the number of Pokemon. And now what we need to do is access the index. So in the map method here, if you hover over it, you have the first argument, which is going to be essentially the value. And then the second one here, you can see is the index, which is a number. So let's go ahead and get the index. So now if I save and go back into the browser, you can see now the numbers are being rendered. So what we want to do now is create a reusable Pokemon card component. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go into here, and what I'm going to do is copy this. And in components, we're going to create a new folder. And this folder is going to be called the Pokemon card. And this will receive props because we need access to the Pokemon image name and the index as well. So in Pokemon card, I'm just going to name index.tsx, RAFCE, and this is the Pokemon card. So if you notice in Gatsby as well, it's pretty much the same as React in a sense where we access and use functions, and we also have access to the React hooks. So that comes in handy. We'll look at examples later on where we use the useState hook especially. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in what I have, which essentially is the image, the name, and the index. So we need access to the Pokemon now. So let's pass that in as well and destructure it from the props. So let's save that. And now what we want to do is we want to go back into the pages here, and instead of returning this, what we want to do instead is return the Pokemon card like so. And let's delete this and add the slash in here. We need the key as the Pokemon ID for this component. So if we pass and import in the Pokemon card, so the key is the Pokemon ID. We also want to pass in the index, which is equal to the index as a prop. And then we also want to pass in the Pokemon itself. So let's pass that in here as well. So now we're passing in the props. We need to receive the props from the Pokemon card component. So we are receiving the index, which is a number, and then the Pokemon card, which is this Pokemon type here. So let's copy that. And in the Pokemon card, we just need to declare the type. So let's this time create a new file for the type. So type ps, and we need to declare the Pokemon and the index. So let's add them in. So export type of Pokemon card, which is equal to, and then essentially we are pasting in the first one, which is the Pokemon. And then we also need the index. So let's paste that one in as well, which essentially is a number. So if we save that, you can see now we have a Pokemon type and then the number. So let's just copy this and change this to a Pokemon type. And we'll change this to all Pokemon type. So we need to define this within this file here. So export type of all Pokemon type. So, and then if we just paste it in, all we need to do now is save this and delete this import. So export all Pokemon type is equal to this one here. And then we need to pass Pokemon card props into this React functional component here. So we're just making sure we are type checking everything that we are receiving. And we also need to pass in the index, which we are receiving from the Pokemon card component. So that's set now. So let's save this. And let's just double check everything is working. So if we go here, you can see the cards are rendering and the Pokemon are loading as well. So that's fine. What we need to do next is style it. So let's style the individual Pokemon card. So in the Pokemon card, let's go into there. And this div is essentially what we need to style. So let's call this div a container, which is relevant for this Pokemon card. So let's create a new file in here. And this is styled.ts. And it's going to be export const of container, which is going to be equal to style.div, and we just import that in. So it will have a display of flex direction of column. So everything within there is a column. It's going to align the items as center, and we are going to justify content as center as well. Margin of 0 and auto. So auto on the left and the right. We're going to have a padding of 1 rem and 2 rem. On top and bottom is 1, and then 2 on the left and the right. Border radius of 20 pixels, so that will be making the edges round. And then we also need the border of 1px solid, but the color will be coming from the theme. So we will do the selector like so, and then it's going to be theme.colors.border. So let's change that. And this border is in the theme file that we have defined earlier. So, and actually what we'll do is the border will be 2 pixels. So let's close this off and check everything is correct. So now going back in the Pokemon card, we just need to import this in from the ./style file. And if we save all, you can see now everything is looking quite similar and is taking shape. What we now need to do is define a grid that renders the 3-column row and then the 2-column row. And then we also need to add the background. So we'll do the grid next. So let's go ahead and do that. And the grid is going to be coming from the index page. So surrounding here, what we need to do is this div is going to be named as grid, Pokemon grid. And then we need to create a style component for this. So let's go ahead. We are in pages. So we in the styles folder, we have the homepage style. So let's go in here. And this is going to be called export const of the Pokemon grid, which is equal to style.div. And essentially this grid is going to be a display of grid. It's going to have 3 columns. So it will be grid template columns. And the columns will be 3 columns repeated as 1 FR. So it will be repeat of 3 and 1 FR like so. We are going to have a grid gap as well. So grid gap of 1 rem and then text align of center. And then what I'm going to do is bring in the rest, which is media queries handling the certain breakpoints. So paste this in as well and now save. What I now need to do is import this in onto the home page. So Let's paste this in as well. And now if we go into the browser, you can see here that everything is being rendered correctly. And now what we can see here is the grid spacing is correct on the X axis, but not on the Y. You can see here there's a massive gap in between. So let's just check what's happening here. So Pokemon grid, we are giving it a grid gap, so that's fine. So everything is fine within there. We just need to debug it in the Pokemon card. So in the container, what I'm going to do is add a few more styles. So what we need to do is style the image and the p tags. So what I'm going to do is paste in the image styles, which is a width of 150px, an object fit of contain, and then the H2 will have a margin of 0. And then we also have hover styling, so that will make the image increase in size. So if we save and check the browser again, you can now see that the styles are working correctly, but then we also still have a gap here, which is quite large. And what I also want to do is give this a width of 100%, and then we just want to remove the padding now. So if I save and refresh the page, you can see here now, essentially the grid is now working correctly. The only difference now, what we need to make is the background colors dependent on the Pokemon type. So let's go ahead and do that. And the way we need to do that is we need to pass in the types of the Pokemon as props, more specifically the first type. So the top row, these guys are green because they're grass type, these are fire type, and then these are water, and so on. So let's go into the browser again, and this time we need to access the background color, and then we need to define the background color based on the type of Pokemon. So going back into the homepage, into our Pokemon card, and then the Pokemon card is going to have a type, so we need to define the background color within the container. So we need to pass in the type into the props. So with style components, you can pass in props within the divs or the styled component that you are using. So in my case, I'm going to call this one types. You could call it Pokemon types is equal to the Pokemon dot type, and we want to access the first index because it's an array. So the first index will be the main or primary type for that Pokemon. So now we have access to types. This is going to be a string, or it could be a union type if you wanted to declare that as well. So let's go into container, and to receive props in here, all you need to do is add in the type. So it will be types, and I'm going to name this as a type of string, but again, you could do a union type as well if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and do the Pokemon types type. So in the types.ts here, I'm going to paste in the type that I have. So it's a union type that could be water, fire, grass, bug, normal, and so on. So there's all these are the different types of Pokemons, and I'm going to copy this, and in my styled, instead of a string now, I'm going to import the Pokemon types. So that is fine. What I also want to do is optional chain this. So types is equal to Pokemon.types of 0, like so. So what we need to do now is in the Pokemon card props, in all Pokemon type, we just need to update that to a union type. So let's go ahead, and this types now will, instead of being a string, will be the Pokemon types that we have defined here. And then there is one more place where we need to update the all Pokemon types. So let's go into all Pokemon card props in here. So we have the all Pokemon cards. So if we now save, and in the style.ts now we have access to the types here. So what we now need to do is, dependent on the type we receive, we need to have a different background color. So let's do background color. And now what I'm going to do is destructure the type coming from the props. So to access that, you would do the $, like so. And then what we'll do is we'll access the types here. And we don't need the theme for this one. But what I'm going to do essentially is to do a switch statement. So essentially the switch statement will check for the types. And if the type is the certain case, then we can render a different color. So in our case, if it is the water type Pokemon, then we can return this color. And fire, you can also return the relevant colors. So I already have done this. So I'll copy this and bring this in. So now what we have is all of the Pokemon types in here, and this is dependent on what is received from the props up here. So now if I go into Pokemon card, the type of the Pokemon card is going to determine the background color that we have. So if we save this, and now you can see we have the green for the Pokemon grass types, and then the reds for the fire types, and so on. And now you can see it's all being rendered correctly. So what we will do next is to add the filters so we can filter out the Pokemons that we want to see.